Ever had a secret come back to haunt you? Imagine thinking you knew everything about your life, only to find out that one thing you didn't know could destroy it all. Let me tell you a story about a young man whose entire future was shattered, not by a family enemy, but by someone he loved, someone he trusted. The worst part? It all started with a will, an old will hidden deep in the family vault, with a secret clause no one could have predicted. My name is Liam Mercer and I'm 28 years old. I've lived most of my life in Portland, Oregon, a city that's a perfect mix of rain and dreams, where everything seems like it's going according to plan, until one day it all falls apart. Before I proceed, kindly subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I've spent my years working for a future that always felt just out of reach, buried under my family's expectations. I'm the grandson of Henry Mercer, a man who built an empire. But he never had much time for me. To him, I was always the well-meaning one, someone who lacked the drive of my cousins or the brilliance of my older brother. Growing up in the shadow of a family like mine can do something to you. You either fight to stay in the spotlight or you get comfortable with being in the background. Me, I chose the background. It was easier that way. But I always had one person, one constant who believed in me, the woman I loved, Emily. Sweet, patient Emily. The one person who made me feel like maybe I wasn't a failure after all. But then came the day I would never forget, the day I was summoned to my grandfather's estate to hear his will. At the time I thought nothing of it. Sure, there were rumors about what I might inherit, but I didn't care much for money. I was more interested in what kind of life I could build on my own, outside of the family's shadow. Little did I know, everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and even Emily would be shattered that day. What I didn't know was that my grandfather had a secret, one that would destroy everything I thought I understood about trust. And it wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. The worst kind. The kind that comes from the last person you'd ever expect. It's funny how life has a way of keeping you grounded, even when you start to think you're finally free. I'm Liam Mercer, 28 years old, born and raised in Portland, Oregon. If you had asked anyone about me a few years ago, they'd say I had potential. But here's the thing, potential doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't give you a place in the world. I always felt like I was living in the shadow of my family's legacy. My grandfather, Henry Mercer, the man who built an empire that spanned generations. To everyone else, he was a hero. To me, he was family. We had an unspoken bond. I spent years trying to prove myself to him, trying to be the grandson who would make him proud. But the older I got, the more I realized that I would never measure up. I was always just the well-meaning one, the one who could never quite match my cousins or my older brother's drive. Still, there was one thing that kept me sane in the midst of it all, her, Emily. Sweet, patient Emily. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with. Everyone around us saw us as the perfect match. She was everything I wasn't, strong, confident, kind. I leaned on her in ways I never realized. Maybe that's why I trusted her more than anyone else. We'd been together for 2 years. It felt like forever, and I couldn't imagine a future without her. I had big plans. We had big plans. Sure, I hadn't exactly figured out what I wanted to do with my life, but with Emily by my side, I figured it didn't matter as much. She believed in me when no one else did. But that was before everything changed. The call came just a week after my grandfather's death. The family estate, this sprawling mansion tucked away in the hills, had always felt like a place I could never fully belong. Still, it was where I was raised. It was my inheritance whether I liked it or not. We were all gathered in the family's drawing room, the air thick with tension. I didn't know what to expect. For all the years I spent hoping to be noticed, I still wasn't sure if my place in the will mattered. I was just another branch in the Mercer family tree, but not the one that had been groomed for greatness. But as the lawyer, Mr. Carrington, an old family friend, started to read the will, something inside me shifted. Everything had been typical at first: bequests to charities, donations to his favorite causes, a few keepsakes to my cousins, and some old paintings. I felt a strange mix of indifference and longing. But then Mr. Carrington paused. His hand shook slightly as he turned the page, as if he'd seen something that took him by surprise. "Ah," he said softly, looking at me before continuing. To my dear grandson Liam, I leave a portion of my estate, but it is contingent on one condition. My heart stopped. The room grew colder. If Liam is in any romantic relationship with Emily, or if Emily has been involved in any way in manipulating or influencing his decisions or actions, he shall receive nothing. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't breathe. The room went completely silent. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I looked at Emily sitting beside me. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. The weight of her gaze, filled with guilt or fear, I couldn't tell which, suffocated me. How could my grandfather know anything about her? How could he have known? I couldn't shake the words of the will. They echoed in my head like a broken record, taunting me with the realization that everything I thought I knew about Emily, about my family, was a lie. Wasn't just the will itself, it was what it revealed. The insinuation. The accusation. My grandfather's words felt like a betrayal in themselves, but the more I thought about it, the more they made sense. I had trusted Emily with everything. She was the woman I had planned to marry. The woman I had convinced myself was my partner in all things, my constant. But the truth? The truth was that I had been blind. There had always been small things I'd overlooked, little inconsistencies that, when pieced together, painted a picture I didn't want to see. At first, it was the way she would disappear for hours, her phone always on silent, her stories about where she'd been vague and unconvincing. She had always been protective of her privacy, but I never thought much of it. I should have. I should have questioned why she'd always get defensive when I asked about her past. But I was too in love, too naive. As the days passed after the reading of the will, I couldn't shake the need to understand what my grandfather had meant. I started digging. What I found was nothing short of unsettling. Emily's name kept popping up, buried in the background of my grandfather's business dealings. There were old emails, notes in his personal files, mentions of meetings, business agreements, trips they'd taken together. But it wasn't just business. It was personal. Too personal. There was a connection between them I never knew about. They had worked together, yes, but it went deeper than that. I found a photo of Emily, much younger, at an event with my grandfather. An intimate gathering, no other family members present. The look on their faces, the closeness between them, sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just professional. It was something more. Something that felt like a betrayal of the highest order. The discovery hit me hard, but it was only the beginning. I kept digging. Late into the night, I pieced together bits and pieces of their past. Bits Emily had never shared with me. I learned that she and my grandfather had been involved in a brief but intense romantic affair years before I ever entered the picture. I had no idea. She never told me about it. She never mentioned the long nights spent together, the whispered promises, or the broken hearts that followed. She had buried it all. And I, trusting her, never thought to ask. But the truth kept unfolding. Emily had manipulated me, using her charm to work her way into my life, into my family's life. Her past with my grandfather wasn't just a romantic chapter. It was a key part of the twisted dynamic I had never known. Had she been pulling the strings all along? Had she been manipulating me to get closer to the family's wealth, the family's power? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my grandfather had seen it all, maybe even before I did. The storm broke when I confronted her. It wasn't just the guilt. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the shattering of everything I believed in, the disintegration of everything I had trusted. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing as I walked into the apartment we shared. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of everything I'd uncovered. She looked up, startled, as though she hadn't expected this moment to come. The fear in her eyes told me everything. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All this time you've been lying." Her face paled, her lips trembling. "Liam, I cut her off. How long? How long were you with him? How long did you hide this from me? From us?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the struggle to find an excuse that would make everything okay. But there was nothing left to say. "You knew. You knew about the clause in the will. That's why you've been acting strange. That's why you kept pulling away. You were waiting for this moment, weren't you?" I pressed, my voice rising. All this time you've been using me. Using my trust. For what? For the money? For inheritance. Her tears began to fall, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. The betrayal stung deeper than I had ever imagined. I never meant for it to go this far, Liam, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, Emily, I said, my voice steady but cold. You hurt the entire family. You hurt us. You turned this into something I never thought I'd have to face. I thought we had a future together, but now I don't even know who you are. The pressure from my family was relentless. As I wrestled with the truth, the family gathered around me, whispering, manipulating, pulling me in every direction. My cousins, who had always looked down on me, were suddenly concerned about my choices. They said it was simple. Cut her off and claim what's yours. I was expected to choose the inheritance. I was expected to prove that I was worthy of the family legacy. The money would give me everything I had ever wanted. Financial freedom. A chance to make my mark on the world. But as I sat there, caught between Emily's betrayal and my family's pressure, I realized something. The inheritance meant nothing if I lost myself in the process. I didn't know what to do. What was I supposed to choose? The woman I loved? Or the family I'd spent my entire life trying to be a part of? The decision wasn't easy. In fact, it felt impossible. But the weight of the betrayal hung on me like a stone in my chest, and every time I thought of it, I felt like I was suffocating. Money, family, love, none of it mattered if I didn't have my integrity. The decision was harder than I ever imagined it would be. For days I couldn't think straight. Every waking moment was consumed by the choice I had to make. Emily or the inheritance? The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, or the wealth and power that had always been just out of my reach? I had thought the decision would be simple. Love her no matter what and let the money go. But the truth was never that easy, was it? I retreated into myself, staying in my apartment for hours on end, drowning in my thoughts. The world outside seemed so distant. I couldn't bring myself to face anyone, not my family, not even my friends. The only thing that mattered in those moments was this suffocating weight in my chest. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about Emily. I thought about the life I had worked so hard to build, and the life I had inherited by chance, simply by being born into this family. What had my grandfather meant by all of this? I thought about the power of his legacy, the wealth, the empire he built. And then I thought about the man I was, standing at the precipice of it all, lost between love and ambition, loyalty and betrayal. Could I really choose money over love? Could I really walk away from the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, for a fortune I hadn't earned? But something inside me kept pulling me back to reality, to truth. And it wasn't long before I started questioning everything, not just about Emily but about myself. What kind of man would I be if I let this fortune define me? Then came the twist. I wasn't looking for it. I didn't want to find anything more. But somehow I found myself in my grandfather's study again, rifling through his old papers. I don't know what I was expecting, but I came across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A letter tucked behind a stack of financial documents. A letter addressed to me. I pulled it out, my hands trembling as I unfolded the yellowed paper. Asterisk, Liam, my dear boy, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to make your choice. Know this, I am not leaving you this fortune because you need it. I am leaving it to you because it is yours to inherit, if you can find it within yourself to make the right decision. You will face many temptations in this world and your life will be full of choices. But always remember, the true measure of a man is not what he has, but what he is willing to lose to remain true to himself. Trust that you will know what is right when the time comes. I know about Emily. I know what happened between you and her, and I know what she did. She will come to you with promises, with excuses, with guilt. But in the end, Liam, the only question that matters is this. Can you live with yourself if you allow betrayal to define you? I stopped reading right there. The letter felt like a punch to the gut. It hit me like a freight train, the revelation that my grandfather had known everything. He had known about the affair, known about Emily's manipulations, and yet he had never said a word. Instead, he'd set me up for a test a final test to see if I was worthy of the inheritance he had left behind. I wasn't just a pawn in a game. I had been given a choice, a chance to decide who I really was. The realization was like the slow unraveling of a dream. The inheritance wasn't meant to be a gift. It was a lesson. My grandfather wanted me to understand that loyalty and integrity could never be bought. They had to be earned. As I stood there in the study, the weight of the decision finally settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just about Emily. This was about me, about who I wanted to be. The money, the mansion, the empire, it was all meaningless in the face of the betrayal I had suffered. Emily had been a part of my life, but she had been a shadow, a distraction from the truth I had been too afraid to see. I couldn't accept the inheritance if it meant living with this betrayal. I couldn't live with myself, knowing that my life had been built on lies. The moment of clarity came swiftly after. I knew what I had to do. I could feel it in my bones. The only way forward was to sever ties with Emily. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. I had loved her, yes, but love didn't mean holding on to something that wasn't real. Love didn't mean sacrificing my self-respect for a future built on broken trust. I reached out to her, my hands shaking, knowing that this moment would change everything. "Emily," I said when she answered the phone, "we need to talk. It's over." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Liam, please, don't do this. We can fix it. I love you." "I loved you too," I replied, my voice steady but heartbroken. "But I can't keep living this lie. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. I need to find out who I am without you. Without this whole thing." I heard her sob on the other end, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. "Goodbye, Emily," I said and hung up the phone. I walked away from the inheritance, from the fortune, from the family legacy. But for the first time in my life I felt free. Free from the manipulation, from the lies. Free to rebuild my future on my own terms, to find my own way without relying on the weight of money to define me. As I stood outside my family estate, looking at the grand house one last time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel bitter. I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've made the right choice no matter how hard it was. Maybe the future didn't look like the one I had imagined, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time I was ready to start over. The days after Emily left were a blur. Her absence weighed heavily on me, but not in the way I had expected. I thought I'd feel empty, lost, perhaps even regretful for cutting her out of my life. But I didn't. Instead, I felt something else, something unexpected. Relief. She left, heartbroken, but she knew it was coming. She knew deep down that there was no way back. It was over between us, and as painful as it was to admit, I knew it was the right choice. It wasn't just about the betrayal or the affair with my grandfather. It was about the trust that had been shattered. Trust that could never be rebuilt. As I stood in the aftermath of it all, I realized that losing her didn't just mean losing the woman I thought I would marry. It meant I was finally free from the lie I had been living. I had been holding on to something that wasn't real, and now I was free to build a life on my own terms. A life that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations or manipulations. The real challenge came next. Facing my family. The ones who had always seen me as second-rate. The ones who had assumed I would fall in line and claim what was rightfully mine. I knew that refusing the inheritance would be seen as a betrayal in their eyes, but I didn't care. It was my choice, my decision. They could never understand, but that was fine. I wasn't living for them anymore. When I walked into the family estate one last time, it was with a sense of finality. I stood before my family, feeling the weight of their gazes on me. They didn't speak, but their expressions told me everything I needed to know. "Liam, you don't have to do this," my uncle said, his voice laced with disbelief. "This inheritance could change everything for you. For your future. Why throw it all away?" I looked at him, at my cousins, and at the life I had always been told I was meant to live. And then I spoke, my voice steady but firm. "The money will never be worth the price of my soul. I've lived my entire life trying to prove myself to this family, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for me. But not anymore. I'm done living in your shadows. I'm done living for your expectations. I'm starting over. On my own terms." The silence in the room was deafening. but I wasn't moved. For the first time in my life, I was unapologetically myself. "I'm walking away," I said, "and I'm not taking a single penny." The weight of the decision didn't hit me until later, when I was alone. Standing in my grandfather's study, I let it all sink in. The years of disappointment, the years of feeling like I didn't belong, the constant battle to earn my place. All of it had led me here, to this moment of clarity. The inheritance had never been the true prize. It wasn't the mansion or the money or the power. It was the ability to walk away from it all, knowing I was making the right choice for myself. The ability to choose integrity over greed. To choose self-respect over manipulation. To choose the truth no matter how painful it was to face. I stared out the window, watching the fading light of the day spill across the land. It was beautiful in its own way, serene, yet filled with the potential of what was to come. And I realized then that the real journey was just beginning. I had lost everything, or so it seemed. Emily, the life I thought I would have, the family legacy I had been so desperate to claim. But in losing all of that, I had gained something far more valuable: freedom. The freedom to start fresh. The freedom to build a life on my own terms, without the weight of betrayal or expectation dragging me down. I didn't know what the future would hold. Maybe it would be hard. Maybe it would be lonely. But at least it would be mine. The story of my past had ended, but the story of my future, one I would write for myself, was just beginning. And that, in the end, was enough.